Okay, so this is education for Integrity Capital. We're going to spend today talking about what I call mining scenarios. And this is sort of a model that we'll be utilizing, and it's just as applicable for you as well, Pat and Lana, because again, you're sort of getting an understanding of, one of the biggest challenges for people coming into this, specifically loan associates, is market knowledge. Okay, so I've had 17 years of like tons of scenarios, all this stuff, and understanding the loan products, and how do you look at a deal, and how do you size it up, et cetera, et cetera. So the challenge is always, how do you take all that information up here and download it in a way that people can start to have a model that they can walk through in order to identify, well, this is how these are the general elements you're looking for when you're working on this kind of deal. And so today we're going to spend some time talking about like an owner occupied purchase. Okay. And so as I walk through this, the way the model is set up is there is the ask, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means, the asset type, and then the client reality, meaning their, the circumstance of the client, the reality of their situation, and then the response. And so, you're taking all this data in, as you're trying to size the transaction up, and then at the end of it, you're going to make a recommendation. You're going to give them feedback. And so through this model, as we record these and have these for future associates, that it will create this framework by which they can go back and reference it to go, okay, this is the way I size this up, and this is how I make a recommendation, and then here's why. And then they'll be able to have a reference point, which we're not going to show today, but they'll have a reference point to go to, one location that they'll be able to get the product. So if it's an SBA 7A, they'll get to go there and walk through and give the feedback to the lender or to the borrower as to what specifically our recommendation is. That's probably the most complicated, challenging part of this business, is just the lack of the market knowledge. So when you're talking to somebody, you can actually tell them, here's what we think is best, right? Here's how I size something up. And so and what I'll do is, as I go through this, is I'll pause if there's questions or comments or things of that magnitude. But the first part of it is the ask. So what I mean by that is, when you're typically talking with a borrower, they generally have some sort of ask, meaning they want something. There's a particular thing that they want to see, that they're looking for, that's important to them. And so under the guise of the ask is, the first one is, one of the things that they're going to ask for, or that they're going to be interested in knowing, is this idea of leverage. How much can I get? What would be the max loan to value that I could ascertain on this particular loan? So in this scenario, for an owner occupied purchase, we're going to make the assumption that they want 90%, which means that they're going to put 10% down on this loan. Okay. And so over to the right here, I just put a little question, which is somewhat of a deviation from this particular model, to say, well, what happens if they want 80%? So if they want a lower loan to value, what is that going to ultimately mean? And what that means in most instances, 80% or lower, more money down, 20, 25% or more, is it means that they don't have to use the SBA, the Small Business Administration program. Okay, what it does is it broadens the scope of products that they can use, okay? So anytime you see somebody lower the leverage on an owner-occupied transaction below 80% loan to value, then that is going to broaden the ability for a conventional loan versus an SBA, Small Business Administration program. So that's just something to be cognizant of when you're dealing with leverage on an owner-occupied transaction. By the way, this goes for, whether it's a refinance, purchase, or, a construction. It just falls under the same bucket, okay? So the first thing you're kind of probably going to deal with is leverage. They're going to want to know what's the loan to value. You guys follow me so far on that? Questions, comments? Okay. The second thing that Lana, did you have something?
Oh, no.
Okay. The second thing you're going to deal with is recourse. Okay. And here's, in this particular instance, recourse will be full 95% of the time. Okay. And specifically on Small Business Administration loans, there is never an instance, unless somebody's living on Mars, that you're going to get a non-recourse loan. Okay. So it's full recourse. And, then you go, well, what happens, right, Dave, if somebody wants non-recourse? And my response to that is, then what you're going to do is you're not going to be talking about SBA. You're not going to be talking about anywhere close to 80% on leverage. You're going to be talking about 60% loan to value or less. I mean, chances are 50. So if somebody wants to put 50% down and start looking at a non-recourse loan, my response is that's a good starting place. It's not a guarantee. So most banks don't like non-recourse. Okay. And let me explain that to you, because you're going to have to explain it to them. They have no idea what this means most of the time. So full recourse means, so when you're having a conversation, you're basically saying, when you go to close the loan, you're going to sign a document that states you and your spouse, if you're married, and anybody else who has 20% ownership or more in the company, will sign a personal guarantee that you are guaranteeing to pay back 100% of that loan to the bank. So if you go into default and they foreclose, take the property back, and they sell the property and you still owe $500,000, you are responsible for that full amount. The next person in line also is responsible for the full amount. So it's what they call joint and severable. Everybody's 100% responsible for the full loan amount of that deal. That's what the documents say. Now, the reality is they can only collect 100%. They can't go 100, 100, 100. But they do this so they can tie everybody up in a noose, so that when the attorneys, pull out their bloody teeth, then they know that they can go after, all these people. Okay. So people need to be aware of that, that's what that means, because most owner occupants are not aware that that's what they mean. They're used to a conventional loan where they go do a home and they know that there's the Housing Act that, they could technically walk away from it if, and be fine. They might have a ding on their credit. So that's kind of the recourse piece. It's assumed, but don't assume it. From their perspective, they need to understand it. Okay. That 99% of the time you're dealing with recourse. So it's rare if you'll ever run into non-recourse for conventional or for owner occupied. So I'll pause. Questions? Does that make sense?
I have a question. So if they sell the loan for X dollars and then they're not able to collect the full amount,
Mhm.
is the borrower still, are they just responsible for the difference that they didn't collect? Or do they still have to pay the full loan?
Yeah, it's a good question. I can give you, I'll answer that. And specifically because it happened to me. I mean, when the market hit and, we had to sell our building was worth half of what it was before. And so I still owed the bank $350,000, and so I had to pay that back. So what they did is they slap a judgment deficiency against your credit. So now you have this, judgment against you for that amount. And by the way, that includes whatever legal fees on top of it. So, if they're using attorneys, I'm also paying all those fees. So if they sell the building, once they get that amount back, the only amount they can collect is whatever is outstanding, plus, default interest, legal fees, and any of the other junk fees.
Which probably can end up being more than
It's
the actual loan itself.
it's expensive. So
Yeah.
most of the times I would tell you that they end up negotiating a lower amount,
Mhm.
because they've already written it off on the bank. So they pretty much already, from an accounting perspective, they've already written it off. So they usually take less, but they can get the full amount.
I have a question actually.
Yeah.
If you're someone that says, well, I want to, because we have the incentives right now with SBA, they say, I want to do owner occupied, but I want to put, I want to go 70% loan to value because I can put that much cash in, but I still want to do SBA because I'm going to get 3 payments forgiven. And I don't want all the fees there's the incentives around the fees. Is that still an option, or is the SBA going to say, well, you already have money, so what's the point?
It's a good question. I would say yes. Where that becomes an issue, if somebody has like a couple $1,000,000 in the bank, doing SBA is hard because that's what they'll literally say. They say you don't need to borrow money from the SBA. You have a couple $1,000,000 in cash. And that does become an issue. In fact, we ran into that with one of the clients, and we got around it because we were able to put it in like a trust account or something. I can't remember. They told us to do a certain thing, but yeah, you can do it. You can still do it.
Okay.
So. Okay, so the next thing is pricing, which is usually the biggest thing, right? What's my rate? And so we're just going to assume it's aggressive. They want the best rate. Everybody wants the best rate, right? That means it's presume that that's going to be the number one issue. And so, the question is what happens if they're unrealistic, which happens a lot. People see stuff on the internet, or, they go to a cocktail party and somebody tells them they got 2%, and so they come in with these preconceived notions, or they come in with an idea that, hey, these should be the same as a home. That's very normal for owner occupied. People just have this kind of home loan mentality in their head. Your job is to unwind that and get them into reality. Okay. So if they're unrealistic, this is where candid but gracious comes in. It's one of our core convictions, is you just have to, be upfront and say, look, that's not really indicative of the market. Sometimes it might be, possibly, but we don't know yet. But if they're unrealistic, you just have to be honest with them and just say, I don't think that's realistic, but, I'm happy to look into it. Because things change all the time. So you don't want to be too black and white, but you do. And I think the gracious part is just, the, hey, we'll look into it, or, maybe somebody else will, I don't know, but, so we just, you're trying to get them back to reality It's part of your job. So, then you go out and do some research and come back. But that's pretty normal. You're going to run into that with respect to pricing, and people are always wanting the best rate. I mean, that's just presumed at this point. So thoughts, comments on that before I go on?
I think it's it's always good when you've got somebody who's asking for something that's kind of unrealistic to always, to always, check and make sure. I mean, as long as it's not completely off the wall, to just say, hey, let me, it's not the norm, but let me look into it. Because I think it gives them a chance to, it gives them a chance to be prepared and accept that, yeah, it's not the norm and you're not just brushing them off, but it also gives us the chance to find out, hey, maybe something changed and maybe we're wrong. So.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Tom, because, commercial changes all the time. So, there could be a special going on. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff. And so I think that is the wise response of, just saying, yeah, that price seems a little aggressive, but, I don't know if that's out there, but we'll happy to take a look, and that does give us the ability to get up to speed, because there might be something new that we're not cognizant of. So I would say that's a good way to definitely handle that for sure. Timing is the fourth one on the ask. There could be some other sub asks, but I just say these are the main things. Timing perspective, again, 60 days is fairly normal. I would tell you right now, it's more like 90. That could change, but right now there's just a lot of backlog. And so, timing, that is something they're going to want to ask for, and that's something they're going to want to know, because again, they don't know. A lot of times they just don't have any idea. And so what happens if the timeline doesn't work? And I would just say the same thing is, you need to be upfront with them to just say, hey, that's, we'll check, but I can just tell you, 45 days is going to be really tough, or, 30 days, anything lower than 60 is very, very hard to do, especially if there's construction. If there's construction, they need to be honestly probably 90 plus, because there's just so many nuances that come into the equation. And that is something you'll have to keep checking on and making sure as you go. But, anything less than 60 days is a push. And if it's construction, it's 90. I mean, that's just the reality of the circumstance. So, your job is to educate them and say, look, this stuff takes time. There's questions that are going to need to be answered. There's appraisal reports. There's, contractors involved. There's, lenders could be backlogged. I mean, there's just so you've got to help kind of mold and paint a picture. And quite frankly, you might need to have the broker who's representing them involved as well to explain to them, so everybody's on the same page when it comes to the ask. Okay. So anything on those elements, comments or things you want to add, or something that I'm not thinking of? Okay. So after you do that, then we go to the asset type. Now, quite honestly, for an owner occupied loan, with the exception of, well, let me get into it. So some of the things you look for is like, what's the location? Is it a major metropolitan area? Is it in a sub-market, which is a smaller market, maybe suburban area, or just a small town? So you just want to know, because that drives in many instances, like if you're in a small market, it's really going to probably, not as much on owner occupied, I would say, definitely on investor, but it could preclude some lenders because they just don't go into the market. It's not within the region. So just knowing where it's at matters, I would say, most of the time. And so just, it's important for you to just understand where it's located and how that will impact, you know, the loan, essentially. The other thing is square footage. So size of building matters. Land size is important to understand. You know, what type of building is it? Office, condo, warehouse, you know, industrial, etc. And specifically the type of building in relation to its use. So if it's a car wash, that makes a difference, because what they consider a car wash is special purpose. If it's a gas station, it's considered special purpose. If it's a bowling alley, I mean, anything that has a special use to it, you know, a surgery center, you know, so something that would be very difficult to convert to a normal use other than that use is considered special purpose. So knowing the type of building in the build out is important, because some lenders have a tough time financing special purpose, because they just kind of go, gosh, if I have to foreclose, then, you know, I'm gonna have to scrape the building or spend a bunch of money to re-tenant it. And you know, if it doesn't work for you, it's not going to work for the next guy. So it's really important to understand the building type as well. Obviously, the condition of the building is important. You know, is it beat up, and roof issues and new HVAC units and et cetera, et cetera. So I think that that's important to understand the condition of the building, because if it's a ratty building, then it's going to make it harder to finance, essentially. The other thing to just notate, I think, on the asset type is, you know, what happens if there's tenants in there? You know, borrower might be buying something and they occupy a certain percentage. Well, for a, you know, owner occupied, if you're going to do SBA, they have to take 51% of the space. And if they don't take 51% of the space, then they cannot get an SBA loan. If it's actually a construction for SBA, they have to take 60%. And within 1 year, they have to take 80. So, you know, if there's tenants in there and they don't occupy that amount, then that could be prohibitive of the SBA loan. And the other thing too, on that same note, is a lot of times the borrowers will say, I'm going to buy this big building, occupy a small percentage, and you know, you're just going to underwrite all the cash flow for the building, and then I could just pretty much get in rent free, right? Because everybody's paying for my mortgage. Well, theoretically, that could be the case. It's not going to be really treated as owner occupied per se if they take a really small percentage. If they take, you know, 30, 40%, that could be helpful, but the bank is really going to still look at them. Can you fund the building yourself with no tenants? You know, and if the answer is no, then that could be prohibitive, because they're not really going to look at the tenants as the primary source of repayment. It's helpful, but don't expect that's going to actually work. There are small instances where I've seen it happen, but I would say it's definitely a deviation from the norm. So, so that's just some things to be aware of, to communicate to them. So in their mind, they're not thinking, oh, well, you know, if my business doesn't cash flow, the tenants will, and I'll be fine. And the answer is no, you won't. It just won't work. Okay. So any questions around that or comments? Okay. So the final element of the model, when you're trying to size up a deal, is the client reality. So now we're at the point where we're kind of going, okay, you've asked for stuff, we've gotten a little bit of information. Now we need to really see what's under the hood, what's really going on. Their experience, it's a big deal. Do they have experience in their industry? Have they been doing this for a long time? Most of the times the answer is yes, which is good. And so you just want to understand how long you've been doing this, and tell me how you got into this, and tell me a little bit about how this all works. So you'll start to get a really immediate thing on their craft, which is good. Sometimes you'll see a doctor going out on his own for the first time, but they've been working for somebody in that craft. It's fine. But sometimes you'll get into a startup and someone woke up and said, I love cooking at my house, so I want to start a restaurant. Well, it's like, well, that's great, but running a restaurant is a whole different animal. So and again, I'm not saying that something can't happen, but you want to make sure that someone has some skill set to do what it is they're wanting to do. And if they don't, because you say, well, what happens if they don't? Well, then you need to communicate to them that they're going to have to find someone to partner with. Someone's going to come in that does have the experience in order to work. We've seen this happen on self-storage, right? Where someone comes in, they want to do a storage deal, they don't have any experience. So we partnered them with somebody who can take some ownership in the situation. So it's just important to understand experience matters. It's going to matter to the bank because they're going to want to see, like, why am I going to lend you money? I don't have any idea what you're doing. People are going to have confidence with someone that's been doing it for, I've been doing this for 17 years. So guess what? I've been through the ups and the downs, and I know all these little nuances of the industry that allows them to feel confident, right? So, that's just important to understand. Experience matters big time. The other thing is net worth. Now, to be honest with you, for an owner-occupied deal, it's not going to matter as much. Lenders aren't going to go, hey, what's your net worth? That does matter more on investment. But for owner-occupied stuff, it's really important that you do have an idea of what they look like financially, because if they have a bunch of debt, that definitely comes into play. But what they're more concerned about is cash. What's their cash position? When they close, have they drained all their cash? Or will they have some left over? So, net worth is good to look at. By the way, when I say net worth, that is assets, all their personal assets, minus all their personal liabilities, gives you their net worth. Okay, that's the equation. Assets equals liabilities. Assets minus liabilities equals owner's equity. That's kind of the accounting version of it. So it's not a big deal, but you do need to know, say, well, where do you get that? Personal financial statement is where you get it. That gives you all the particulars. The next thing is the client's outside cash flow. So this is why we collect personal tax returns and personal financial statements and, all those things, is so we can run a cash flow to ask the question, if with all their personal income they have and all their liabilities they pay out, do they have excess cash flow to support the loan that they're getting on the building they're buying. That is what would be deemed in many instances a global cash flow. So they're going to look at them and say, you know, could they cash flow this if the business doesn't? For some reason, do they have the ability to have outside a second, you know, another way is a secondary source of repayment. That's the other terminology that you'll hear. And so it will be important to understand that you're going to collect financial information to know that. And so that'll be part of the reality discussion, you know, if they have, you know, no outside income, or if they have a negative, you know, so they don't have the capacity to do it. So you'll want to know that for sure. The next one is business cash flow. So this is the primary business the lender is going to underwrite and look at, and you know, their company that they're operating, they want to see, do you have the ability with the business to service the debt? And when I say service the debt, I mean 1.25 times is the magic formula. So you say, well, what the heck is that? Well, you take, if their net cash flow, which is essentially their net income, you add back depreciation, you add back rent if they're going to replace the rent, and you add back interest expense and any non, you know, recurring expenses. That gives you net cash flow. You take that number annualized and divide it by the annualized payment of the, well, I should say, you deduct their debts from that, their annual debts they pay, and then you take that number divided by the annual payment they're going to make on their new property. So if their net cash flow was 125,000 and you divided by the new debt payment is 100,000, then that gives you a ratio of 1.25. Okay. So the lender's basically saying, I want you to have 25% cushion above the payment. Okay. So because, you know, stuff happens and, you know, maybe they have a bad month or a bad year. So they want a little bit of buffer, you know, as opposed to 1-to-1 where there's no room for error. Okay. You guys tracking with me on that?
Mhm.
Okay. So it's just important that you see, and if it's not, you know, if they don't have that, then you say, well, gosh, what happens if it's not good? Well, you know, you're going to have to kind of, I mean, it's a little bit of a story. It could be that their most recent year wasn't good, but the last couple of years weren't good. So in that instance, you're going to have to kind of go like, what happened? Well, we had COVID. I mean, that's a pretty normal thing you're hearing right now. So that's a reasonable explanation. And so you need to understand the story. You know, we were ramping up this year, hiring a bunch with the expectation of growth. Okay, that's a good story, you know. But if you start to see trends going downwards, that's going to be a problem for the lender. So we want to know what it is that the story is in order to explain it, unless we can't explain it. They're just getting worse, you know, and that's not good. So you have to take the time to understand the cash flow first. Then when you do, you have to go back, and if there's an issue, you've got to be able to address it with them to say, help me understand why this isn't working. You know, is there something I'm not seeing? You know, in a lot of instances, you'll hear people just say, well, I just write everything off. And you go, well, that's great. You know, good for you. You're not going to pay taxes, but you're not going to get a loan. You know, I mean, so it's just, you know, you have to kind of understand the story behind what's going on. The next thing is ownership. You know, is it just them? Is it them and their spouse? Is it multiple partners? And you say, well, gosh, Dave, why the heck does this even matter? And my response is that, if you have multiple partners, you need to communicate with all them so they're all on the same page, because that could cause all sorts of issues. You have multiple partners and one partner says, oh, I'm representing everybody and they all love what my decisions are and no issues. It's like, well, maybe that's the case. And, there's a little bit of trepidation there, but, it's important that you understand that the information is getting communicated, because if you get to the end and the person has no idea, they're like, what, I'm signing what? No way, I'm out of here. Well, you just wasted 50 days and you just blew a deal up. So it's important that you know who they are, communicating with them as well, because it will have an impact on whether the deal gets done or not. So ownership is important. Anybody with 20% or greater is going to have to sign personally on a loan. So you have to communicate that to the borrower. And some instances, even if they have lower than that, if it's close, the SBA might ask for a guarantee. Dan is experiencing that right now. So you just, you've got to know this stuff and be prepared to communicate it with the borrower. If they say, well, I have an investor has 25%, they don't want to sign. That's great, but they're going to have to be way below 20, maybe 10 or 15. But, that could become a real big issue. So
sorry, out of curiosity, what's that situation that Dan's running into? Like, how close is it? And
we had it at 19, and the SBA just said, it's too close. We think they're going to come back and just say, no, they need to sign. So now they're telling us 15, but
interesting.
who knows? That might even be too much.
There's even a smaller deal that I'm doing. We got signed up with a franchise 7A loan, and Commerce Bank did look at the 19% owner, same thing, and it was a very small balance. It was like 200 or 270,000, and they still looked at the 19%, thinking they're hiding something. So I would honestly say just avoid the 19% altogether with SBA.
Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, so you got to tell clients, like, you got to be 15 or lower. Right now is a weird time too with the PPP loans. And I mean, it's really heightened. So just assume for the time being, that's the case.
Okay.
Okay. So the equity goes back to cash, right? So, you're always going to look at their personal financial statement. You're going to do some math real quick and say to yourself, okay, they're buying $1 million building, putting 10% down, and I only see $50,000 on their personal financial statement. What's the question you're going to ask?
Where's the rest?
Show me the money, right? So, where is it? Well, we're working on it. Well, that's not good enough. Where are you going to get the money? Well, you're going to hear a couple different things. My parents are going to lend it to me. Okay. How much? I don't know. You got to know this stuff, because the SBA gets real finicky about, borrowed monies. What are the terms? Is that going to affect the debt service? They need to have at least 5% of their own cash in the actual deal. Otherwise, it's not going to fly. So, if somebody's saying they're going to borrow 100%, well, the response is that's not going to be borrowed money. It has to be a gift. It can't be an obligation. They have to do that. Someone says, well, the seller's going to carry back a second. That's fine, but what are the terms? Because the way the SBA works is if a seller carries back a second, they can't receive payments for, quite a bit of time. Sometimes the whole life of the loan. So it's really important that you address this issue with the client up front. They need to understand early on that they have to have cash. And even if they don't have the cash, you need to tell them that they're going to have some cash. I mean, it's lender's not going to be comfortable them closing on a building and having no cash. That's risky. So you say, well, gosh, Dave, how much? My response is you probably need to have at least 6 months of payments in the bank post funding. So that's after you've put your down payment. You say, well, what if it's 5? I mean, you get my point. It doesn't have to, it doesn't have to be exactly 6, but somewhere in that ballpark is what you're shooting for. But you got to find that out up front, and it needs to be addressed to the client in order to do that. So any questions about all this before we get to the response?
No, makes sense.
Okay. So really, at the end of the day, you really have 2 options for owner occupied. It's conventional bank or an SBA loan. And the SBA loan is either a 504 or a 7A. 7A loan is 25-year amortization. It's one loan. It could be floating. It could be fixed. Depends on the client. And so, if they are going high leverage, 90% or higher, you will go SBA, period. Unless there's some, weird situation. You are going to do an SBA loan with the client. You're going to explain to them about the product, why you're recommending it. It's a higher leverage loan. It's 25-year amortization. The prepay's 531. You walk them through some general interest rates, which will be dependent upon how strong they are, how weak they are. And then, you'll explain some of the nuances of the SBA, the fees, the fact that they're going to take a second on your home, some of the things that come with an SBA loan. You're going to explain that to them. And I'm not going to get into the product details here because we'll have a frame of reference for that. But, and then the bank, or a bank loan, again, same thing. It's 20% or more down payment, and then, less fees, et cetera, et cetera. So this is the response you're going to give to them, and you'll have access to a product sheet that you can go reference. They'll be part of the tool chest for the loan associates to be able to make recommendations. This will reference that. You can go read through that, understand it, and then communicate it to the client. But it's really important that you are fully aware of how to listen to what it is that they're wanting, the ask, understand what kind of asset that we're dealing with, and then looking at the client reality so that you can be effective to give them an appropriate response as to what it is that we're going to offer and as we try to be competitive and win the business. So that's a lot to take in. Are there any questions about this or comments?
No, I think it was good.
So
What's interesting about the SBA wanting guarantees from more people, because that's, yeah, that one's come up recently with clients.
Yes, it's true.
So one clarification. So in the case that a business, it's an SBA loan or owner occupied deal, business is cash flowing really well, but personally the borrower doesn't have a lot of liquidity. Like it's probably just all invested in assets or, in different areas. So they only have like, let's just say $20,000 in cash and that's it. But their business is producing really good revenue and it would definitely absorb it. It's producing enough cash flow where the loan will be fine based on what the company's producing. Does that still have an impact on the loan being done or would that not?
Yeah, I mean, if it's, the question naturally is going to be, if you're producing a bunch of money and you don't have like much cash, the natural question is, where's it going? Right?
It's true.
Now, maybe they have it on the personal side and they just take it on the money out, or maybe it's on the business balance sheet, but you do just want to understand that question. Or maybe they have a lot of debt. Or it could be that they're paying down a bunch of debt. So that would be another good excuse of why they don't have a lot of cash. So I would just say in that instance, you would just want to know, like, where's the money going? Looks like you're making a bunch of money. Where is it?
Yeah.
And so you just want to understand where it's going so that you can best, guide them and give them advice. Because if they don't have cash, I would say you gotta get some, because it's going to be an uphill battle if you don't.
Thank you.
Good question. Any other questions or comments? Okay. So that is the education for the, mining scenario for owner occupied at Integrity Capital.